Well, let's start. Because like I like to say, some Friday nights we have a cozy crowd. Sometimes it's nice to have little groups. I think it's better. Like if you have 128, it's a little harder to do than if you have 15 or 20. Or sometimes, if you're doing something around a table with 5 other people, it can be really good. Tonight I'm starting the Song of Songs at my Sheffield group, and that always blows people away. So I told them they had to pray ahead of time, come in, buckle their seat belts, and so this is session 6. This is session 6. Only 27 more to go. And I was thinking of that. Driving over here because, sometimes if there's a consensus like we should take a break, that's fine. There's going to probably be some Thursdays where I can't come or a whole bunch of people can't come. We might have to rearrange it. But anyway. Yeah, it's a long time. Oh, yeah, because you're going to be gone. And then, of course, there'll be holidays coming up. But anyway, so there'll be some natural breaks. But, yeah, Thanksgiving. Yeah, Thanksgiving morning I won't be here. Thanksgiving's the only holiday I like. So, oh, yes. I put it in the oven about 5. Make most of the stuff. She makes a little bit. I make most of the stuff that goes along with it. I love Thanksgiving. Then all my liberal, godless relatives come over and make fun of me, but that's okay. I like eating. So session 6, we ended the last session. The last 2 sessions were Abraham, Avram, then Abraham. And I think we ended the last one with the Lord, 3 angels come to his place, and we went through the alternating singular and plural. And then I think the ending of that passage is kind of sobering when it says the 3 men got up and they looked towards Sodom and started walking towards Sodom. But tonight we're finally, or today, I'm sorry, I'm used to doing nights. Today, we're going to talk about Isaac. We're not done with Abraham because Abraham doesn't die till the very end of Genesis. And we still have Abraham still has, I'm sorry, not very end, but he dies later. But, we still have a lot of stuff to do with Abraham. But today, we're going to get to Yitzhak, to Isaac. And remember, he's named Yitzhak because it means laughter. And Abraham laughed, and then Sarah laughed at the thought of they were going to have a baby. And, the book of Hebrews in chapter 11, as I'm sure you've read Hebrews, chapter 11 is called the Hall of Fame of Faith. And the writer, whether it's Paul or not, I don't want to get into that, but the writer says that Abraham and Sarah were as good as dead. That's pretty snotty, but they were as good as dead. So, but now they're going to have Isaac, and this is going to happen. We're going to take a look at Genesis 22. Remember, Genesis is Bereshit, that means in the beginning. One of the I watch a couple of Israeli channels on my cable, and one of them has this cute little song that teaches little kids what the books of the Torah are. And it's like one of those little sing-song things that a 4-year-old would like or a 3-year-old would like. And it goes through the books in English, then goes through the books in Hebrew, and it's real cute. But so, I'm sorry, 21, Isaac is born. So somebody wants to start reading the beginning of chapter 21.
Now the Lord was gracious to Sarah,
Okay, wow. So Isaac's born, and you notice it says, in Abraham's old age, at the set time that God had appointed. Everything happens in a set time. That's why, the Friday night group, when the feasts of Israel, the feasts of the Lord, are called the Moedim, which means the appointed times. In other words, everything has to happen at a certain time. God doesn't say, well, celebrate Passover whenever you feel like it. Or, do this whenever you feel like it. It's also always a set time. So it was a set time for Isaac to be born. Didn't matter that Abraham was 100 years old, and Sarah's like 90-ish. They've been moving around. Ishmael is, maybe 12 years old at this point, maybe more. But this is the time when Isaac was supposed to be born. And so he names him Isaac and follows the command that on the 8th day he circumcises him. So Abraham has circumcised himself. Yikes. Then he circumcised Ishmael, and now he circumcises Isaac. And I think it's cute here that when it says that he was 100, Sarah said, God made me laugh, and all who hear will laugh with me. I think that's cute. So, and this is why one of the other reasons it's good to know a little bit of Hebrew. I mean, the first reason is so when you go to heaven, you won't have culture shock. But the second reason is when you realize that Isaac's name means laughter, it makes that funny. Sarah says, everybody's going to laugh with me because they'll say, what'd you name your son? She'll say, laughter. So like if your next door neighbor had a baby and said, oh, we named him Laughter, you would probably chuckle and go, oh, that's cute. But she had a good reason for doing it. So she says, who would have said to Abraham, Sarah would nurse children, for I have borne him a son in his old age. She doesn't even mention her old age. She's long past menopause. Long past. Remember in the old days when a woman had a baby and it was like, menopausal time, and they'd say it was what'd they call it? Change of life baby. That's right, change of life baby. Well, this was way after change of life baby. She's like 90. So now we have little Yitzhak. Problem is now we also have little Ishmael living there, and his mother, the slave woman. So she was Sarah's slave woman. So now this is Abraham's son. Now remember, he becomes the ancestor of all the Arabs. So the Arabs actually believe that Ishmael, of course, is the main son, and Isaac was the not important son. Even though they revere Abraham and Isaac, and they feel that, as we're going to get into the almost sacrifice of Isaac, they feel that Abraham tied Ishmael to the rock, and that later the Jews perverted the true scripture and changed it to Isaac. So, but that's, just kind of a gee whiz information. So, you see it still in 21. So the child grew and was weaned, and Abraham made a great feast on the same day that Isaac was weaned. I mean, that was an important thing in the old days. I mean, not just ancient times, but even old days. I mean, you didn't have baby formula. And if you give a baby cow milk when they're really young, it doesn't work well. Cow milk is very hyperosmotic compared to human milk, and they get diarrhea and they get sick. And so if the baby's mother could not feed it, this is where the old concept of the wet nurse came from. They looked for a woman who was feeding another baby and fed your baby too. We're going to see Moses' wet nurse turned out to be his real mother, which was kind of cute. But anyway, so when a child was weaned, that was like a huge breakthrough because then you could start giving them matzo ball soup and corned beef sandwiches and Reubens and potato pancakes. Isn't that good? Boy, I love going to Corky and Lenny's, and I don't know if you guys ever go to Corky and Lenny's, but yeah, they have this thing called beef and latkes, which is potato pancakes with the corned beef in it, and then it's kind of rolled up. Oh, I order that every time I go, and then I drive home going, oh, why did I eat all that?
There used to be a great deli in Akron called Blue and High's. Same thing. It was an iconic place, and then as modernization, they tore it down and built a drugstore.
Yeah. Yeah, all we need is more drugstores. There's one on every other corner, but yeah. So, and Sarah saw the son of Hagar, the Egyptian, whom she had borne to Abraham, scoffing. Therefore she said to Abraham, cast out this bondwoman and her son, for the son of this bondwoman shall not be heir with my son, namely with Isaac. And the matter was very displeasing to Abraham, in Abraham's sight, because of his son. Now remember, this whole thing with Abram and Hagar happened because Sarah insisted on it. You know, sleep with my servant girl. Maybe you can get her pregnant. Maybe she'll have a son. And so she insisted on it. Now she says, get that bondwoman and her kid out of here. So now she has her own son. And, you know, that's a sticking point with Abraham because Ishmael is also his son. But God had told him, this one is not your heir. Isaac is your heir. He's the child of the promise. And the promise, of course, ultimately is Messiah. Messiah Jesus comes from Isaac. Obviously doesn't come from Ishmael. So Ishmael, you know, he got blessed. He got plenty of descendants. He had kings. But he wasn't the child of the promise. But God said to Abraham, do not let it be displeasing in your sight because of the lad or because of your bondwoman. Whatever Sarah said to you, listen to her voice, for in Isaac your seed shall be called. Yet I will also make a nation of the son of the bondwoman, because he is your seed. So don't worry about Ishmael. You have to cast him out because you have to listen to your wife. But don't worry about him because I'm going to take care of him anyway. But through Isaac is going to come your seed. Now remember, we heard about seed back in Genesis 3:15. You know, from the seed of the woman is going to come the Redeemer. So now this is the seed he's the seed of Abraham that Messiah is going to come from to fulfill that. So basically, to summarize some of this, because I can't read all of it, you know, Abraham gives Hagar and the boy some provisions and sends them away. Kicks them out of the house. They go wandering into the desert. And if you look down 17, God heard the voice of the lad. Then the angel of God called to Hagar out of heaven and said, what ails you, Hagar? Fear not, for God has heard the voice of the lad where he is. Arise, lift up the lad, and hold him with your hand, for I will make of him a great nation. So God provides them with more provisions, with water, and gets them through the desert. And he lived, interestingly, in 21, says he dwelt in the wilderness of Paran. That's later where in Book of Numbers, where the bronze serpent is going to occur. So now Ishmael's out of the family picture. He's not in family photos anymore. He doesn't come over for Thanksgiving. Doesn't send him any Christmas cards. I mean, he's out of the picture. Where's Jordan? This is tough. This is a tough crowd. So now we're going to go to 22. So this is big stuff, because you talk about a prefigurement of Messiah. Here we go. So somebody start reading at the beginning of 22.
Sometime afterward, God put Abraham to the test and said to him, Abraham, here I am, he replied. Then God said, take your son Isaac, your only one, whom you love, and go to the land of Moriah. There offer him up as a burnt offering on one of the heights that I will point out to you.
Okay, pause. Oof. Now, he's been waiting and waiting for this boy. Now he has the boy. We don't know how old he is. Some of the rabbis say that he was 12 or 13, circumcision age. Some of the rabbis say he was older. Some of the rabbis say he was younger. We don't know how old Isaac was when this happened. So I'm guessing he probably wasn't 30, because if he was old enough, he'd probably put up a fight. You're going to do what? But see, interestingly here too, God calls to him Abraham, and he responds, here I am. The Hebrew word there is the word hineni, that's used only about 5 or 6 times in the whole Old Testament. And it doesn't just mean, hey, I'm here, what do you want? It means, here I am, what do you want me to do? I'm available to do what you want me to do. This is the first time he says it. He's going to say it again in a few passages. Then Moses is going to say it. Isaiah is going to say it. It's repeated several times, but it's the word hineni. Here I am, I'm available, what do you want me to do? Now, look at this passage. Now take your son, your only son, the one you love, and you're going to take him to a mountain that I'm going to show you. And what's that starting to sound like? Your son, your only son, the one that you love. And he's going to be sacrificed on a mountain. I'm going to show you the mountain it's going to be. There's a place in Jerusalem that's you have a whole panorama of the city from this height. And I didn't know this before, but it's a nice place to go stand and look out at the city, especially at night. But there's a plaque there that says, Jewish tradition says that when Abraham was taking Isaac for the sacrifice, this was the place he laid eyes on Mount Moriah, which is the Temple Mount. Mount Moriah is the Temple Mount. So that's where this happened. That's where Isaac was almost sacrificed. And the Muslims believe that Ishmael was almost sacrificed, and that's why their big mosque there is called the Dome of the Rock, because it's over the rock that they say it happened on. So take your son, your only son, the one you love, and offer him on this mountain I'm going to show you. Now remember, when Abram was called, when he was still in the land of the Chaldeans, when he was still in Iraq, God called to him and said, leave here and go to a land I'm going to show you, and he does it immediately. In fact, this past Saturday, in the Torah portions, there was a portion which is called Lech Lecha, that means get up and go. It has like a sense of you got to do it right now kind of thing, and not wait around and think about it. And I was very honored. I got to read it at Tikvat Israel. That's one of my favorites. But gets called. Here again, he's called to take him to this mountain. And go ahead, keep reading, John, at 3.
Early the next morning, Abraham saddled his donkey, took with him 2 of his servants and his son Isaac, and after cutting the wood for the burnt offering, day, Abraham caught sight of the place from a distance. Abraham said to his servants, "Stay here with the donkey while the boy and I go over there. We will worship and then come back to you."
Okay, let's pause. So Abraham, the next morning, gets up and starts going. So again, he doesn't wait around. He says, "So here I am, I'm available, Hineni. What do you want me to do? Here's what I want you to do." He arose early in the morning, got all his stuff together, took a couple of servants, split the wood for the offering. On the third day, he sees the mountain where this is going to happen, on the third day. And interestingly, he says to his servants, "Stay here with the donkey and the boy. I will go yonder and worship, and we will come back to you." He doesn't tell them, "Well, I'm going to take Isaac up on that hill and I'm going to kill him. You guys just wait here because this is going to be tough." He says, "I'm going over there to worship, and I'm going to catch y'all in a little while because I'm going to come back with the boy." So that's an interesting line, because is he thinking God's going to stop it? Is it just a test? Is he thinking the boy's going to die and then somehow God's going to raise him back to life? We don't know what he was thinking, because all it tells us is he says, "I will come back, and we will come back to you." He doesn't say, "I'm going to go kill Isaac and I'll be back. Then you guys, will burn him up and that'll be the end of him." So he's going to come back. Now in 6, now remember, keep in mind what this is sounding like. And go ahead in 6.
So Abraham took the wood from the burnt offering and laid it on his son Isaac, while he himself carried the fire and the knife. As the two walked together, Isaac spoke to his father Abraham. "Father," he said. "Here I am," he replied. Isaac continued, "Here is the fire and the wood, but where is the sheep for the burnt offering?" "My son," Abraham answered, "God will provide the sheep for the burnt offering." Then the two walked on together.
Okay, pause. So now Isaac's probably getting a little worried because you got the wood, you got the fire, you got a knife. Where's the animal? Now, look at the other thing that's happening here. Abraham took the wood of the offering, burnt offering, and laid it on Isaac. So Isaac's carrying wood on his back as they're going up the hill. His father put the wood on him. When Yeshua, Jesus, climbs the Mount Calvary, the Golgotha, he's carrying the cross, which of course is wood, up the hill. Now, those crosses were probably heavy. And for somebody who had been beaten, like even though he was a young, healthy man, with the beating that he took, with all that excruciating thing that happened to him, and he would have had a tremendous amount of blood loss, horrible. Imagine carrying a cross over your back, where your back has been ripped open by whips and shells and pieces of metal and all kind of stuff they used to put in the whip. But his father put the wood on him, because the wrath of God has to be satisfied. And it's either satisfied by his taking it or we take it. But later on we're going to learn, when we get to Joseph, that it's God arranges the sufferings and the things that happen for a purpose. You meant it for evil, but God meant it for good. Those guys that were crucifying Jesus, they were like, "Oh, good. Let's kill this guy, get this over with. We'll get rid of this troublemaker." The Romans could have cared less. They loved doing this. Roman soldiers hated being in the land. They hated the people. It was boring. There wasn't anything to do. So, we're going to take and crucify 3 guys. Oh, great. Let's go do it. It's part of their entertainment. then they could have cared less who they were killing. You couldn't kill another Roman, but you could kill anybody else and there would be no consequences. So they meant this for their own purposes if we're going to get rid of this troublemaker. God meant it for a completely other purpose, which of course is salvation. And it's forgiveness through blood, it's sanctification through blood, it's justification through blood. So this is happening, and as we go through Torah, you'll see the blood sacrifices, that life is in the blood. Without the shedding of blood, there's no forgiveness of sin. So we see how these all prefigure the cross. So here, his father puts the wood on his back, and Isaac carries it up the hill. And right down to, he's got all the stuff for it that they would normally do an animal sacrifice. And Isaac says, my father, and again he says, Hineni, here I am, my son, I'm available for you. What is it? Well, we got the fire, we got the wood, where's the lamb? Jesus says, my God, why have you forsaken me? He says, if you could let this cup pass from me. And again, when it's Holy Week, when it's Good Friday, when it's whatever, Resurrection, Holy Week, Resurrection Day, you read the accounts of the Passion, and you always read that thing about how, Jesus in Gethsemane says, let this cup pass from me, but, your will be done. If you want me to drink it, So the question is, what is the cup he's talking about? We're not going to talk about it in here, but the cup is a cup of judgment. It comes in the book of Isaiah. The cup is full of dregs and disgusting stuff. Sour wine, which they also gave him to drink. Sour wine, dregs, bitter stuff. And God says to Israel, you're going to hold the cup, you're going to look in it, and you're going to drink it. In other words, this is my judgment, and you're going to drink it. You're going to be judged. And then 2 verses later, he says, but I'm going to take the cup from you, and you won't have to drink it. So he tells Israel in general, you have to drink this cup of judgment. Then a short time later, he says, no, I'm going to take the cup from you, and you won't have to drink it. Your sin demands judgment and demands condemnation. You got to drink. You got to look into this cup and go, oh, and you got to drink it. But then he says, I'm going to take the cup from you. Jesus says, let that cup pass from me. He's looking into the same cup because he knows what's going to happen. That cup's going to be poured out on him, taken out of Israel's hand, taken out of our hand. Even we as Gentiles, that cup's taken out of our hand, and it's poured on him. It's, he drinks it down to the dregs. We're going to learn late. Well, maybe not in this class, but quoted several times. He drinks the whole cup, the whole judgment, the whole dregs that are in the cup are poured out on him. Pretty amazing. So in verse 8, I love this. My son, God will provide for himself the lamb. So the two of them went and kept going. God will provide the lamb. Now, how is that a prefigurement? Well, God provided the perfect sacrifice. You committed a sin in the Old Testament. You went and got the cute little lamb that was over here. You went to the temple with it. The animal was sacrificed. Your sin was covered by the blood of the animal. So an innocent victim dies because you've committed sin. So here, Abraham says, God will provide the sacrifice. So he provides Yeshua, Jesus, as the Lamb with a capital L. That's not something we did. Nobody prayed to God and said, send us a redeemer so we can kill him, and once he bleeds, our sin can be forgiven. He provided it. He provided the way. Because let's face it, like I've probably said a million times, if we had to make the plan of salvation, would we make this plan? No, we'd make a much simpler one, like, let's just forget the whole sin thing. Let's just forget about it. Everybody goes to heaven, everything's cool. Let's not get all bent out of shape about stuff, right? Isn't that how we'd be? So, God's going to provide the lamb, and here God gets another one of his names in the Old Testament, which is God will provide. It's Yahweh Yireh, or Jehovah Yireh. Starts with a J, but it's pronounced like a Y because of the Hebrew lettering. But the little yud can be, generally makes a Y sound. But somehow in English it got translated into a J. But God will provide, Yahweh Yireh. God will provide. You can also, because the word Yahweh is unpronounceable and can't be pronounced, and many of the rabbis feel that one of the reasons that God's name is unpronounceable, along with people being not worthy to say it, it's unpronounceable because they wouldn't want Gentiles to profane his name. So the Gentiles wouldn't know how to pronounce it because it's 4 consonants. So that's why it could be either Yahweh or Jehovah. But anyway, regardless, God gets one of his names, God will provide. And he provides the sacrifice. There's a great Paul Wilbur song that we play sometimes on Friday. That's, I don't know, see when if the song's not playing, I can't remember how it goes. But the line of the song that's very powerful is, Yeshua is the lamb that God has provided for the sacrifice. And it's not just because, I stole a $20 bill from Tony and then I lied to him about it's everybody's sin put on him. So why Galatians 3:13 can say, he becomes a curse, because cursed is anyone who hangs on a tree. He becomes the curse so that we can get the promises. So God provides the lamb. He provides, he comes right out and says it. He will provide, God will provide for himself the lamb, who of course was Jesus of Nazareth. So if you don't get anything out of session 6, that's like the key. Isaac carries the wood. Your son, your only son, the one who you love. Okay, then, go ahead, start at 9 again. Yeah.
2 other parallels that kind of jump out at me about Isaac's birth.
Yeah.
Is when you made the point about a set time.
Yeah.
That nothing happens when it's not supposed to. God sets the time. And so for Isaac's birth, then we go to Galatians 4:4, and the writer says, when the fullness of time has come, God sent him.
Born of a woman.
At a specific time
Yes.
supposed to happen.
Yes.
Then you go back to Sarah, Abraham, and Isaac, and it was amazing because they were so old. Well, you go to Christ, and even more amazing, here's God's son.
Yes.
The parallels are like endless.
Yes. That's awesome. Good point. Born of a woman and born under the law. And it's interesting because he had to be, number one, of course, he had to be born of a woman because he had to be a man. And he's born in that covenant, which then he follows the covenant his whole life. If he violated God's law, he couldn't be the Messiah. So when the Pharisees said, your master, he's not from God, he doesn't keep the Sabbath. He kind of instructs them about keeping the Sabbath. But so that's good. That's a good point. Because, you ever wonder why Jesus wasn't born 100 years later or 200 years earlier, or why wasn't he born in 1259? Or, he was born when he was supposed to be born. He was born when he was supposed to be born. He was born when he was supposed to be born. He was born when he was supposed to be born. He was born when he was supposed to be born. He was born when he was supposed to be born. He was born when he was supposed to be born. He was born when he was supposed to be born. He was born when he was supposed to be born. He was born when he was supposed to be born. He was born when he was supposed to be born. He was born when he was supposed to be born. He was born when he was supposed to be born. He was born when he was supposed to be born. He was born when he was supposed to be born. He was born when he was supposed to be born. He was born when he was supposed to be born. He was born when he was supposed to be born. He was born when he was supposed to be born. He was born when he was supposed to be born. He was born when he was supposed to be born. He was born when he was supposed to be born. He was born when he was supposed to be born. He was born when he was supposed to be born. He was born when he was supposed to be born. the world was at peace because of the Pax Romana. Nobody could make war against Rome. They had the system of roads. They had the boat, ship travel around the Mediterranean. So all those guys could walk along the roads and evangelize people and get on a ship and go to Greece or go, but I mean, we would consider it pretty tough travel, but in those days that was pretty cool. Of course, now, a lot of our preachers have private jets. But we won't get into that. Okay, go ahead. Start at 9 again.
When they came to the place which God had told them, Abraham built an altar there and arranged the wood on it. Next, he bound his son Isaac and put him on top of the wood on the altar. Then Abraham reached out and took the knife to slaughter his son.
Okay, let's pause. So they came to the place where it has to happen. Okay. There was a place in Jerusalem where Jesus had to die. It wasn't in Nazareth, wasn't in, Bethlehem, wasn't someplace in Lebanon. It had to be in Jerusalem at this particular place. He picks the place and he builds an altar. Now, look at this altar. He's got wood on top of it. He puts Isaac on top of the wood. So Isaac carries the wood up the hill, then Isaac gets laid on top of the wood. So the cross, look at it as, of course, it's wood, but it's also an altar. In the crucifixion, as the writer to the Hebrews tells us very powerfully, Jesus is the priest, he's the victim, and the cross is the altar. So just like the priest in the temple was killing the lamb on the altar, he was the ultimate lamb, capital L. He was also the priest, and the cross was the altar where it happened. So that all the things in the sacrificial system would come to its natural completion. Because it all prefigures it.
One thing I heard once, I think this is correct, but when he said it is finished, wasn't the shofar blown and the lamb was being sacrificed
Yes.
in the temple at the same time?
Yes. Yes. Because it was Passover. And
So that's that time, that perfect time again,
yes.
where it just fulfilled that.
Yes.
It was so beautiful.
Yes. We're going to learn later that God tells them that every morning and every late afternoon they have to sacrifice a lamb as a perpetual offering for sin. Perpetual offering for sin every day. Lamb in the morning, lamb in the afternoon. Boom, 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 boom. Imagine over centuries how many lambs that was. Plus everybody came with lambs for their own personal sin. Plus then you had Yom Kippur with bulls and goats. You had all this other stuff. But it was I forgot where I was going with this. But it also has to do with set time, because the afternoon sacrifice came to be 3 p.m. The first lamb was at 9, the second lamb was at 3. So the scripture kind of tells us Jesus died at 3 p.m. if you kind of follow the hours that it mentions. And he has to die outside the city. At the time, it was outside the city walls a ways, because of the Old Testament commandment that you have to put sin outside of the camp, outside of the community. Since he was the curse, since he who did not know sin became sin, he was killed outside of the city. But when the true lamb was dying outside of the city, in the temple, the priest, the high priest, was killing the lamb at 3 o'clock for the sins of the people, and it was Passover. And that's when the veil split. And they still didn't get it. You would think the high priest would have said, "Whoa, what's going on here?"
But you know who did get it? Very interesting. It's the
The centurion. Yeah. Yes.
mentioned earlier, those
Yes.
wanted nothing to do with it.
Yeah.
But he understood.
Yes.
So that's one of the first miracles.
And he was a Gentile pagan. Yeah. Yeah. So he puts his son on the wood. Okay. 11.
The angel of the Lord called to him from heaven, Abraham, Abraham. Here I am, he answered.
Okay, pause. This is the Malach Adonai. This is actually God's voice, not an angel. And Malach Adonai can mean an angel or it can mean God in the sense of he's telling you something. So notice he says, Abraham, Abraham. Now in Hebrew, when you call somebody twice, that means make sure I have your attention. Like when Jesus says, Martha, Martha. You know, the burning bush says, Moses, Moses. You know, Moses wasn't used to bushes talking. But when this bush says, Moses, Moses, Moses goes, whoa, he called me twice. Here's Abraham, Abraham. And again, he says, Hineni, here I am. What do you want me to do? I'm available to do what you want. Go ahead.
Do not lay your hand on the boy, said the angel. Do not do the least thing to him. For now I know that you fear God, that you did not withhold from me your son, your only one. Abraham looked up and saw a single ram caught by its horns in a thicket. So Abraham went and took the ram and offered it up as a burnt offering in place of his son. Abraham named the place Yahweh Yahweh, since hence people say today, on the mountain the Lord will provide.
Okay. Woo. So after he says, Abraham, Abraham says, here I am, says, don't kill him. You know, it says he's got the knife in his hand. It says, don't kill him, don't harm him in any way. For now I know that you fear God, since you have not withheld your son, your only son, from me. This is another reason we know this isn't an angel talking. Because whoever's talking says, you haven't withheld your son, your only son, from me. So your son, your only son, the one who you love. And here it's, you've not withheld your only son from me. It's a sacrifice of Jesus as the ultimate sacrifice once for all, as it says in Hebrews. It's the ultimate sacrifice, of course, to the Father. He's not withheld from the Father. He's obedient to go through with it, even though he says, let this cup pass, and oh, why have you forsaken me? Because he quotes the Psalm, why have you forsaken me? You know, the Father's, in some way, has turned from him. Because God can't look on sin, and Jesus was all the sin of the world. So here it says, you haven't withheld your only son from me. So now I know you're really faithful. God's willing to sacrifice his own son so that we can be saved. You know how there's that passage, we didn't do Sodom and Gomorrah, but you know there's that passage where Abraham says, well, you know, what if there's 50 good people there? You know, what if there's 20, what if there's, you know, you think like, well, what if there were, you know, instead of 8 billion human beings, what if there were 10 human beings on the whole planet? You know, would Jesus have come and died for 10 people? You can think about that one. But you see the power in this. You've not withheld your son from me. And then he lifts his eyes and he sees a ram caught in a thicket by its horns. This is why we have the shofar. The original shofar is from a ram's horn to commemorate this passage. You can make shofars from antelopes and ibexes, whatever they are, and some other things. But the ram horn was kind of the traditional shofar. It's the little fat one compared to the big curly ones. You guys can probably tell me about ibexes and antelopes and stuff, but there's certain animals you can make shofars from. But originally it was the ram horn from this passage. Later on in Exodus, God's going to tell him you can use these other animals to make them too. If you want to make like a big curly one so it looks cool when you blow it instead of this fat little thing. That little one I have is ridiculous. I can't even make a sound on it. Once in a while it goes burp, but that's about it. So Abraham takes the ram and sacrifices it, notice, instead of his son. So this is a ram. It's a sheep. Right? We don't know how old it was, but the lamb dies in place of Isaac. Isaac is spared. The lamb dies. We're spared because the true lamb, capital T, capital L, died. Substitution. Don't kill Isaac, kill the lamb. Now you notice what's happened here, thinking of it in salvation history. God spares the human son, but doesn't spare his own son. Lets his own son die so that humanity can be saved. This is why, when you say that to people, they look at you like, what? I always go back to 1 Corinthians when Paul says, it's foolishness to those that are perishing. He says, I only want to know Christ and Christ crucified. I only want to talk about Christ and Christ crucified. Because that's the only thing that matters. Like I always tell you, if you don't think about the cross 20 times a day, you don't get what happened there. So, substitution. The lamb dies in Isaac's place. So how cool is that? Then he names the place, the Lord will provide. That's kind of cute too. Kind of weird to write on a map, but. And now, because Abraham has done this and willing to do it, he says, then the angel of the Lord, Malach Adonai, called to Abraham a second time out of heaven and said, by myself I have sworn, says the Lord. Now, God can only swear by himself. There's no higher thing that God could swear to. Like we go to court and we say, so help me God. I'm surprised they haven't gotten rid of that. But what's that? Yeah. But, that's why Jesus says, watch when you say that. Like people say, well, honest to God, that's what it. Because once you bring God's name into it, you better be real sure that it was exactly what you say. So he says, I swear by myself, because you have done this thing and have not withheld your son, your only son, says it again. 3 times he says your only son. Blessing, I will bless you, and multiplying, I will multiply your descendants as the stars of heaven and the sand which is on the seashore. And your descendants shall possess the gate of their enemies. In your seed, all the nations of the earth shall be blessed, because you have obeyed my voice. So because Abraham obeys, because he has this faith, and you can read chapter 11 of Hebrews, God restates the promises to him. Descendants, land, all the nations of the earth are going to be blessed through you. All the nations of the earth, all the goyim, all the Gentiles are going to be blessed through you. Now this is, of course, the Hebrew scripture. So now, you have observant Orthodox, ultra-Orthodox Jews who read the scripture, minimally once a year, but if you study it, it's many, many times. somehow the seed of Abraham is going to bless the Gentiles. And they still don't get it. I had a guy, very smart Jewish guy who really knew the scripture. In fact, I was very honored that we got invited to his son's bar mitzvah, and it was really pretty remarkable. If you've ever been to a bar mitzvah at a regular synagogue, these are 13-year-old boys who read a Torah portion, they make a teaching. So first they read it in Hebrew, then they read it in English, and then anywhere from like a half hour to an hour, they do a teaching about that passage. It's pretty remarkable. Imagine our 13-year-old boys doing that at, whatever church you go to. But anyway, so I was very honored he invited us to the bar mitzvah, so we went. But he told me one day, he says, I think I have this Jesus thing figured out. And I said, what's that? And he goes, well, Jesus isn't a Messiah, but God sent him to earth so that you Gentiles could understand that there was one God that you should be worshiping. And then, of course, those guys, they screwed it up, because then they said, well, he was God. And they started worshiping him that God sent to tell the Gentiles there was only one God. So I said, oh, no. But anyway, so this was his big revelation. He and I are still in touch, but boy, he's tough. I don't know how many breakfasts we've had at Denny's and lunches at Olive Garden where we've gone over and over scriptures. But anyway, so is that cool or what? And then in chapter 23, we're going to just briefly say Sarah dies. Sarah lived 127 years. These were the years of the life of Sarah. So she died in what is today Hebron, which is a very important city because Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, Sarah, Leah, and Rebekah are all buried there. It's called the Tomb of the Patriarchs. The Muslims consider it a holy place because Abraham, I'm not sure if they think Ishmael's buried there or not, but so there's a big building in Hebron. We've never gone there because everybody tells me don't drive there with a rental car because there's always trouble. There's a big building, half of it is a mosque and half of it is a synagogue. And there's a wall down the middle of it, and there's a thing on the floor that you can see on both sides that says, this is where Abraham's buried. So the Jews come in on one side, the Muslims come in on another side, but they don't see each other. Then they go outside and fight. So Sarah dies in the land of Canaan. Abraham came to mourn for Sarah and to weep for her. Then he buys a place there in Hebron to bury her, which, as I say, becomes the Tomb of the Patriarchs. Now, when Israel was giving away land for peace, or what they hoped would be peace, one of the places they gave away was Hebron. So Hebron's actually under Palestinian control. And so was Bethlehem, which I could never understand, since it's the city of David. But anyway. So now we've got one descendant, Isaac, and in order for him to make more descendants, he's going to have a wife. That makes sense. So Abraham arranges for a wife for Isaac. And we're going to not spend a lot of time on this, but please read it for your homework. Isaac says, Abraham says, I don't want Isaac marrying some Canaanite girl. I want him marrying a girl from back home. I want him marrying a girl from back home. Now, Abraham hadn't been there for quite a while, but so he sends his servant Eliezer there, and he gets a word. And he's gone on this long journey with a camel, and the word he gets is, a woman who comes and offers you water and then offers your camel water, that's the girl that Isaac should marry. Aren't you glad you didn't have to go through that when you were going out with girls in high school? So, long story short, Rebecca, whose Hebrew name is Rivka, Rebecca is the girl who comes out and offers Eliezer water and then says, oh, by the way, I'm going to give your camels some water too. So he says to her, hey, I'm here to find a bride for my master's son, and I think you're the one. So, we always talk about the patriarchs. We don't usually talk about the matriarchs. Of course, Sarah, Rebecca. We're going to see Leah and Rachel. But Rebecca becomes one of the matriarchs. She says, when this woman comes, he says, please give me some water from your pitcher to drink. And she says to me, drink, and I will draw water for your camels also. Let her be the woman whom the Lord has appointed for my master's son. So Eliezer, the servant, goes to Rebekah's house, and we meet Laban, who's her father. He's actually related to Abraham. He's going to be Jacob's uncle. Jacob isn't born yet. So we're skimming this. The servant says to Laban, look, she's the one. Going to marry Isaac. She's going to like him. Abraham's my master. She's going to come with me. And she agrees. Well, of course, women in those days didn't have much of a say because marriages were generally arranged. Right? I mean, even in the gospel, it tells us Mary and Joseph were betrothed. Now, we don't know what went on before that. Did Mary's parents say, hey, you're going to marry this guy Joseph because we like him, and if you don't like him, tough. Let's just hope it works out. Or, would Joseph have said, you know what? I'm already going out with her. I want to go out with a girl who, no, we already arranged this. Because marriages were generally arranged. That's so far out of our experience that we can't even imagine it. Imagine how many arguments you'd have where you'd say, I can't believe I had to marry you because my father was... I'd have been better off with so-and-so. Good, Linda's laughing at least. Jordan, if you're watching the YouTube, that's so they tell Rebecca, the family tells Rebecca, take some time, stay here 3 weeks, get your stuff together. Rebecca says, I want to go now. So Rebecca responds in faith and wants to go right then. Now, she doesn't know anything about Abraham. She's never seen Isaac. For all she knows, Isaac is some ugly dude. But she wants to go right then. So it says they sent Rebecca away. They sent Rebecca, their sister, and her nurse, and Abraham's servant and his men. And they blessed Rebecca and said to her, our sister, may you become the mother of thousands of 10,000s. And may your descendants possess the gates of those who hate them. So they give her a blessing, and they send her on her way. And then it's kind of a cute, because it ends up being kind of a cute love story when Rebecca and Isaac see each other. But then later on, as you probably know, Rebecca conspires with Jacob to fool Isaac and to deceive him, and then takes one son's side over the other son. But that's another story. So they're approaching. Isaac went out to meditate in the field. This is verse 63. And he lifted his eyes and looked, and there the camels were coming. Then Rebekah lifted her eyes. When she saw Isaac, she dismounted from her camel. For she had said to the servant, "Who is this man walking in the field to meet us?" The servant said, "It is my master." So she took a veil and covered herself. And the servant told Isaac all the things that he had done. Then Isaac brought her into his mother Sarah's tent and took Rebekah. She became his wife, and he loved her. So Isaac was comforted after his mother's death. So he sees Rebekah, likes her. She sees him. She likes him. So he takes her as his wife. So how cool is that? So this is kind of arranged, and it's kind of a covenant marriage, but it's cool. So then Abraham actually gets married again and has some other kids, but we're not going to deal with that. You can read that in 25. He marries Keturah. And he has a bunch of other kids. I mean, this guy was like indestructible. I mean, he's well over 100 at this point. I mean, he's like probably 120 by this time. But then finally in verse 7, he dies. This is the sum of years of Abraham's life which he lived, 175. So 110 years on Social Security. He had some excellent retirement plans, so he hadn't run out of money. And he got promised land. Okay, he's got some land. He got promised descendants. Well, he's got one. 2 if you count Ishmael. Then Abraham breathed his last and died in a good old age, an old man and full of years, and he was gathered to his people. Then look how cool this is. And his sons Isaac and Ishmael buried him in the cave of Machpelah, which is before Mamre, in the field of Ephron, the son of Zohar the Hittite, the field which Abraham purchased from the sons of Heth. There Abraham was buried, and Sarah his wife. And it came to pass after the death of Abraham that God blessed his son Isaac, and Isaac dwelt at Beer Lahai. So it's cool, the 2 half-brothers come together for Abraham's funeral. So we don't know if they argued about the will. Wanted to find out how much life insurance he had. Isaac said, "I'm sick and tired of being the only one doing all the work. You better go over here too." Boy, this is a tough crowd. Whew. So I thought that was kind of cute that they both go to the funeral. And this is again in the Tomb of the Patriarchs. Now, what we're going to end with this is, and then it goes through all the genealogies. I mean, if you really want to know the genealogy of Ishmael, there they are. Chapter 25. And I guess since the Holy Spirit put this all in here, it's important at some level. I mean, if you really love to impress people with your biblical knowledge, you could say, "Let me tell you the genealogy of Ishmael," and rattle off all these sons that came from him. Now you see in 19, this is the genealogy of Isaac, Abraham's son. Abraham begot Isaac. That's a whole different genealogy. Look, if you look above, Ishmael's got all this stuff. Isaac was 40 years old when he took Rebekah as his wife, the daughter of Bethuel the Syrian of Padram Aram, the sister of Laban the Syrian. Now Isaac pleaded with the Lord for his wife because she was barren. Now in those days, I would think it's probably pretty odd for a man to not get married till he was 40. But anyway, so he prays because she's barren. And Rebekah, his wife, conceived. But the children struggled together within her. And she said, if all is well, why am I like this? What's happening to me? Why am I like this? She's got pain, she's got struggle, she feels like stuff going on in her womb. And the Lord said to her, 2 nations are in your womb. 2 peoples shall be separated from your body. One people shall be stronger than the other, and the older shall serve the younger. The older shall serve the younger. This is going to be repeated again when we get to Joseph, when the 12 tribes. So when Rebecca gets pregnant, she's got twins. There's 2 nations at war in her womb. One's going to be stronger, but the older one's going to serve the younger one, which of course in ancient families would be, the older one gets everything. If you were the second son, nice going, but your brother Billy Bob, he gets all the stuff. You don't get anything. And if you're the daughter, the best you can hope for is that they arrange for you to marry a nice guy who's got a few sheep and goats. Or maybe, works at a good job, with a financial institution or has a good government job or something. So we're going to end there because, of course, these 2 boys that are in Rivka's womb are going to be hugely important. One is going to be hugely important. The other one's going to be important. So, any questions, comments?